Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Road Not Taken. I'm Matt Anderson. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, whose name is Steve Plewes. Steve, if you just want to say a few words about yourself to introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, well, good morning, Matt, or good evening if you're where it depends on where you are. My name is Steve Plewes. I have been in the financial services business up until recently, almost 40 years. A couple of years ago, I sold my practice and evolved into kind of a passion that I've had and became a certified life coach. And so I've tried to marry those two things together. Recently, during my last career as a financial advisor, I was and still continue to be involved with the $1 Million Roundtable, 32-year member, 11 top of the table qualifications. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, that's very impressive background, Steve. I'm glad you can join us. I still want to start with a question around obstacles from your own life before, obviously, now you're helping other people get out of their own way professionally. But for yourself, was there a defining day when you felt like you'd sort of hit a wall and there was something that prompted you to want to get out of your own way?
Yeah, it's funny. I've given a lot of thought to this over the last couple of years, and especially as I was writing this book that I've just done. I've always had limiting beliefs, shall we say. Mm-hmm. And I've given it a lot of thought over the years where these limiting beliefs came from, and learning to own those limiting beliefs. There was a time, a couple of key points in my life where I knew I could do better, and frankly felt that I may even be destined for something bigger than what I was currently involved in. But I just couldn't figure out quite how to bridge the gap between where I was in my own thinking and where I kind of instinctively knew I should be or could be. And part of that was not feeling that I deserved it, frankly. Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple of things that as I contemplated this for our interview today, there were some key places in my life where I felt almost guilty about the success I was having. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of those times was right after my brother died. When I was 30 years old, my brother had become sick with cancer. He was a younger brother, 3 years younger. And that was a very tough time for all of us. Some pretty momentous things happened that year. My parents got divorced, which is not uncommon in a situation like that. I had just had, my wife and I had just had our first child. We bought our first home. I was having success, but yet I felt like, how could I deserve to have that kind of happiness and success when my brother was sick and dying and all that? So that was kind of a watershed year for me because actually it was the very first year that I made the $1 Million Roundtable, as it turned out. And I would love to say that I was inspired by his life or something like that, but quite frankly, it was just a process of me coming to terms with, hey, I'm on this earth for some reason. I need to kind of figure out what it is, and my brother's gone, but I'm still here. And I think that was the beginnings of when I started kind of reconciling those thoughts. And once I actually did get my head together later that year, I did focus and make the $1 Million Roundtable for the first time. And that in and of itself was a transformational experience. So
I want to go back to when you said, a feeling I didn't deserve it. I know you've done a lot of self-reflection because you've written about it. What I haven't read yet is that journey. So talk about that feeling of not deserving it. Because I think from everything I've accumulated in my 52 years, it seems like that is arguably the biggest obstacle that people have. Mm-hmm. So what was your journey on, on that topic in terms of understanding it and I guess, dealing with it and then surpassing it?
Well, I don't want to give you my whole life story here, but I grew up in a small town in Southern Virginia, and there was not a lot of visible success in that town. It was an old manufacturing town. It was racially segregated when I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
My models for success were people like my dad, who was an insurance agent, but he never was trying to accomplish anything other than put food on the table, so it wasn't average was kind of the norm.
Mm-hmm.
It was good enough to grow up and get a job and stay out of trouble and get married and have kids. That would have been good enough. And so that was kind of the environment I grew up in. And at some point I had changed my thinking, or discovered that maybe there was more to it for me than just that. Now I imagine that a lot of people growing up in small towns might have that same feeling. Simon and Garfunkel wrote a song about it called My Little Town.
Okay. And
lyrics were, in my little town, I am my father's son. And so, I did have a desire to break out of that shadow. My dad was a large figure in that town. And when I say a large figure, I mean, he had been there his whole life. So everyone knew him, and therefore I was part of that. And I just felt like at that point I needed to leave. And I did. I got in a car and drove to Washington, D.C., which was the closest big city. Mm-hmm. I decided to seek my fame and fortune as a guitar player. And so once I did make that leap, I started getting involved with other people who had bigger thoughts. And those things rubbed off on me. Mm-hmm. And, Matt, I'll tell you, it's easy to say that, we're lucky in life, that we, I got lucky, but, and we all have lucky opportunities coming before us, but, I will give myself some credit for being smart enough to take advantage of some of the opportunities that I was presented with. And, I did get lucky and become involved with an insurance company that had they had a vision for what an insurance agent could be that was outside of just collecting premiums and selling policies. And so as I started to become involved with that company, learning that I could do more things like become securities licensed or become a financial planner, I was young. I really didn't have anything to lose. And so, I took the chance to get involved in those things.
So where did that desire or thinking come that maybe there was more? Do you recall?
I always had a feeling that, in fact, I used to talk about it with a couple of close friends, that we would get together and talk about it, how, and not in an arrogant way, not in a cocky way, but just in a way that, it's almost like a little secret that that we wouldn't say it out loud, but we would say, I think we're going to, there's something bigger for us somewhere down the line. And I think we just knew it. I don't know if it was, I don't know that I can articulate exactly where it came from. It was just a feeling that I had somewhere all along, and I know others have it and had it, right. Had that feeling before.
I agree. And I think people listening, I think they wouldn't be listening if they didn't have some of that feeling themselves. I don't think they'd be listening if on some level, it's funny, even though we often have that negative self-talk, like we don't think we really deserve it, right. That there is this piece in us that maybe we can't figure out where it comes from, but where we do have a certain small level of belief that we can do a lot more. And that's what I'm particularly interested in. And so what I'm hearing from your story so far is that you took action on it. You got out of town, perhaps to be more independent or live your own life and not perhaps, as you said, in your father's shadow. And then maybe, I don't know, we don't need to go into this much detail. You certainly landed with a company that had a higher vision of wanting to develop people, because as you say, that wasn't always true in the insurance industry. And then they provided different opportunities. But you also made this point about who you spent time with. You said something about people with bigger thoughts. And I'm hearing this over and over and over again now. I mean, it's quite funny. I feel like I'm literally being bludgeoned with the thought. Ever since even before I started this podcast, it's quite uncanny how many people talk about that. And while it's not new information, perhaps it never is about the information. It's about what are we doing with, who are we specifically surrounding ourselves with, who are we spending less time with and more time with, and seeking out those things to elevate our lives, our thinking. So that's what I've gathered so far. But you shared an enormous amount in the first piece that you talked about too. And I'm just wondering which was the most obvious piece. Well, again, so you said you talked about this horrendous year when your brother died and your parents divorced, but you described it as a watershed year. I want you to say a bit more about that, because not too many. I mean, when I think of, I don't know, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think what I mean, it was a year where things became very cut and dried. They became very the choices were very, very clear. It was like I can respond to this situation in one of two ways. I just didn't see a lot of gray, and I'm a gray thinker. I see. I'm not black and white in my thinking. I see a lot of possibilities in everything, which sometimes can muddy the waters in terms of making life decisions. But at that particular time, I knew that it was either I'm going to just kind of dig in and stay kind of where I was, or I was going to move on and make something of myself. And I don't want to be dramatic about it, but maybe at some level I wanted to do it for my brother or do it for my family. Mm-hmm. I could have gotten way down in the spiraling negativity that was occurring in my family at that time. Mom and Dad split up. My brother did something incredibly stupid, which is irrelevant to this conversation. I could have gotten all caught up in all that drama, but I didn't. I chose not to. I chose to say, look, I've got my own family. I have a wife and a young daughter, and we have a bright future, and I'm going to focus my energies there. I'm going to focus my energies on positivity. And some of the people, when I say that I was influenced, I was introduced to some motivational tapes, things like Dennis Waitley and some of those early psychologists who would talk about, the books, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon, all those kind of books. I absorbed that stuff, and it did color my thinking. So that's what I mean when I say a watershed year. It was a turning point. It was a place where I said, look, I'm looking around. There's a lot of negativity. I don't want to be involved in that. I'm going to take a different path.
Makes total sense now. Thank you for explaining that better. And then talk about so I want to combine two things here. You then went on a journey that got you to top of the table for 11 years, which, again, you probably know. What is the percentage of people in your industry that make top of the table? I mean, is it less than 1%?
It's got to be less than 1%.
Yeah, I mean, because
you hear the number all the time, 1%, but I think the top of the table is even less.
Yeah, because I remember when I spoke at $1 Million Roundtable, I think someone said that it was the top 5% in the industry globally, and that's the first tier. So anyway, point being is, yeah, you accomplished a remarkable amount. And I also want you to sort of weave in the descriptions around your book. You talk around how the wording is the basic truths. So I'm assuming that's kind of, is that journey that you went on where you learned basic truths about what's needed to be very successful in business?
Yeah. So just to give you a little bit more background about what kind of came next once I made this decision to assert my thinking and to follow my instincts a little bit more. I left this insurance company. I went to work with an independent financial planner. We became partners, and for a number of years, it was a great experience. He was a good mentor to me. One of the things I talk about in the book is, I learned a lot about how to do things right, but I also learned a lot from some people about how to do things wrong. And that was kind of around some of the ethics that were wrapped up in this partnership. But that was a great growing experience for me, and I'd say generally a positive one. I'm going to the MDRT meetings. I'm part of an independent firm. We're taking some risks. We're starting to do fee-based financial planning when other people weren't doing it. Mm-hmm. So, confident years. Those were confident years. But I think you can have confident years, but still get to plateaus in your life. What ended up happening for me at that point was I outgrew this person. And looking back on it, I outgrew this person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm tremendously loyal, and so it was agonizing for 2 or 3 years, essentially knowing that I was in, figure of speech, a bad marriage,
mm-hmm.
but I didn't really know how to get out without the pain. Eventually, it came to a head, and that's when I started doing coaching, being coached. I got in a coaching program. It helped me to realize what I really wanted, and why I wanted it, and then I just had to, rip the Band-Aid off, as they say. I went through a fairly ugly business divorce
mm-hmm.
at that time, but it was because my values did not align with his. And that became like a core basic truth for me, was when you realize that what's causing you conflict, or what's causing doubts, self-doubt, or what's causing you to feel guilty, all these feelings that you have, it's probably coming because you're involved in something that does not align with your core values.
That's an interesting thought in terms of something that people listening can reflect on or even journal on as well, I suppose, is as you say, if there's things that feel out of alignment in our lives, to sort of dig a bit deeper about, well, what's going on here, and does it align to what I most value? I interviewed an amazing woman a couple of weeks back who went from suicide thoughts and Alcoholics Anonymous to being a world champion CrossFit Games winner. And she talked about one of the things that makes a big difference is being clear about what you value and what your priorities are. So you're saying that's something you did as part of after you hired a coach?
Yeah, so after I started doing the coaching, I became a lot more clear. And now one of the things I say all the time to my clients is, who are you? What do you want? And why do you want?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the things that I learned. Those are the things that I discovered as I was going through coaching, that the things that were revealed to me, what it is I really want out of life and why I want it. And the who part was really about what are my core values? What will I no longer accept? What are my boundaries? And one of the things I learned, Matt, was that your values really are that's the metric that you use to measure your success, your real success. I mean, I know it sounds impressive to say, well, he's a 32-year MDRT member and 11 top of the table, qualifications. And maybe at some level it is impressive, but how do you get there is the question. This is where everyone always wants to know, well, how do you go from just being a guy, who had a couple of, challenging things in their lives to top of the table? It sounds like a tremendous journey, and it's incremental decisions. But some of the incremental decisions are understanding, why am I procrastinating all the time? What am I afraid of? Where's the fear come from? Where's the guilt come from? Where's this feeling of inadequacy, or this feeling of not deserving? And a lot of that came from just this exploration of really my values. What is it? Who am I? Mm. So to give you a little bit of an example about this, and I know it probably sounds a little bit like gibberish at the moment, but if money is if that's a value, that's something you place high value on, then you will measure your success by how much money you make. If relationships are of high value to you, if you place high value on relationships, then you will measure your success according to how many good relationships you have.
Right.
Does it make sense?
It makes total sense, yeah. I want to go back to that why question when you said, you talked about, you thought through what you wanted and why you wanted it. And I don't have the perfect question teed up here. What's going through my head, though, is this interesting notion I've been reading about more recently, that a lot of, when we dig deep about why we want what we want, a lot of it seems to come down to how we actually want to feel. So again, a superficial example might be, I want a Porsche. But why do I want that nice car? It's ultimately because it's how I'm going to feel about myself. And so then it begs the question, well, do you need a Porsche to feel that way? What could you do now to feel that way? So I'm going with this is I'm curious what you discovered when you dug into the why part about why you wanted what you wanted. What did you get from that exercise, and how was it different than kind of the feeling piece I was just talking about?
I think it does wrap back around to values. Honestly, if that makes you feel, if a material thing like a Porsche made you feel successful, that's because your values are telling you that that's what success is. Mm-hmm. Somewhere along the line, somebody told you, or you believed, or you bought into this idea that if you have a Porsche, you're successful. Mm-hmm. So but I still think that wraps around to your basic value of who you are.
Yeah.
So, and the why, I always think about it. I know Simon Sinek has a book, Start with Why. I think of the why part is that's the where the passion comes from. That's where the energy comes from. When you say, I want to have a happy marriage. I mean, this is one of the 5 big life goals that I documented early in my coaching experience. And when I say coaching, being coached.
Yeah.
I put down 5 big life goals. One of them was I wanted to stay married to my wife for my entire life. Now, that had to do with maybe my values around not seeing my parents not be able to do that. I wanted my children not to experience, a divorce. So my why had to do with wanting to provide a good example for my children, wanting to be a good leader in our family, and not to mention have a successful marriage, that just have a wonderful life with this woman who I love. So, and I realize that things happen in life. People do, things happen and people do get divorced. But for me, my why there was I wanted to have these, I wanted my children to benefit from the stability that came with that more than anything.
And is this when you talk about, we titled this show, Bridging the Success Gap. Are these the types of things you're talking about that are sort of a fundamental part of that process for people to get clear on?
Yeah, I think so, because I think we all have this idea of who we are, who we think we are, who people say we are, who others expect us to be. And then there's this other person that in your heart that you could be. Mm-hmm. Maybe you I don't love the word should, but let's just say that you have the potential to be, that you've always known that if you could just be your real self,
right,
that you would be so much more powerful, but you're afraid to be that vulnerable. And that's the gap I'm talking about.
It's interesting. Last year I was reading Gay Hendricks' book, The Big Leap. And he argues that the reason that we don't take, or most people don't take that leap, in other words, that leap to be the person that we know in our hearts, or we sense in our hearts we have the potential to be, is this fear that if we try and fail, it would be too painful to bear, as we head towards the end of our later years. So what do you say to that?
I would ask the question, what's the alternative? To just be miserable, to be stuck, to be constantly ruminating about what could have been. To me, and it's an interesting question at this point in my own life. I sold my business 2 years ago, which is a bit against the grain in the financial services industry. I mean, we have a reputation in that industry of kind of dying at our desk, dying with our boots on, that kind of thing. And fortunately for me, I did get some religion about that early on, to the place where I could make a decision to value my business and actually sell it and realize that value. There were some reasons why that I did that, but I'm going through a transition, which is why I brought this up. I'm transitioning from this very comfortable lifestyle of my own business, having complete control over everything, making great money, and frankly, being financially independent. Why would I walk away from something like that to go into a world of uncertainty, to become a coach, and to try to help other people do something with their lives. And I thought it would be a little bit easier than it actually turned out to be. But this idea of transition can be painful.
Mm-hmm.
I think the challenge is that the whole key to transition is for something else to start, something has to end. And I think maybe that's the root of this question that you asked. You know, people say it would be too painful it'd be too painful to start something different, to be somebody different, even if it's your real self, because of the downside risk. But I think people don't do it because they never truly let go of what they have. And that's the hard part. I think all the rest of it is just smoke.
What do you mean? So what do you mean by smoke?
This idea of just, well, the reason I don't take these risks is because it'll be too painful. But I think it's more because they don't want to let go of what they have, because it's very predictable and it's very comfortable.
Right.
They are.
And yeah, so it's letting go of the predictable and, well, who they've been labeled as for now. I would also argue it's often what people are very good at. It just may no longer be their deepest passion, and perhaps their deeper calling, and that's perhaps the harder part as well. That makes it even harder. And then I think for some people, I mean, not everyone's been quite fortunate to be in your position where there was in such a good financial position. I think that's the other concern people have, is that it would feel like too big of a risk financially to do something like that. Again, what do you say to people in that situation? I mean, again, I know it's not black and white and people's situations vary, but in terms of encouraging people to take the leap.
I mean, the way I've tried to look at this is that there's a core values, core skills, your basic instincts, the things that make you good at what you do now. We all have these things. So you're great at your job. You're great with people. If we are growing, we've learned to become more in touch with what those things are. And I maintain that whatever you want to call those things, it's been called unique abilities. It's been called your core skills, your core purpose, whatever these gifts and talents are that you might have. I think they're transferable. And so when we start thinking about transition in the context of, well, I'm giving up something that I enjoy, or that I've always done, or that I'm good at, or this is how people know me, and so it's safe to give that up and go to something that I'm unsure of. I think it's because they're not really truly in touch with what their core values are and what their core abilities are, and how they could be replanted someplace else. Now, when you're talking about somebody who has not adequately saved, and quite frankly, I think there's some interesting reasons why maybe financial advisors in particular don't leave their careers until they get sick, or they have a heart attack, or they die, God forbid, is because they haven't prepared. They haven't, practiced what they preached. I'm sure that's part of it. Because when you have a very good lifestyle with money coming in, and as long as you keep doing what you're doing, the money's good, they can't afford to stop. And I think that's probably a reality.
Yeah.
And there could be some other psychological things, like maybe they don't want to spend that much time with their spouse, or their spouse doesn't want to spend that much time with them, and everything's working just fine. So why mess up, a good thing? But I would just encourage people to, once you get on the other side, which I have gotten to the other side now, I realized somewhere along the way that all the things that made me happy, all the things that gave me energy when I was one-on-one with a client, or when I was interacting with my staff, or working with vendors in the financial services industry, all those things that really made me happy were things that could make me happy in a different environment, in a different role. So if you're a good manager at IBM, it's probably because you have great people skills. It's probably because you're intuitive. It's probably because you enjoy listening to people. You understand how to listen, all these kind of basic things. So when I'm trying to coach people about this, I want them to identify what are these things that they could take and put into a different environment that might, allow them to be more free, to grow those things to a place where they never really thought they could, or maybe they couldn't inside that little box that they're in.
forgive me for going back, but one of the first things you said that in our conversation today was how you'd always had limiting beliefs. And it's so funny because in the margin when you said that, I wrote down the word "really," and I put that because again, most people listening, even if they're not familiar with financial services specifically as an industry, they know that there are millions of people in that industry, and so to be in a top, whatever it is, 0.25% of people in terms of production for consistently, it's incredibly hard for those other 99.75% of people to believe a statement like that. So on one level it's great to hear it because it's more reassuring that Steve's just he's human too. But I want you to talk a little bit about, I suppose, how you've faced those down, or how you've turned some of those upside down and beaten some of them down. And on some level, I know, of course, you have already talked about some of the ways you've gotten there, but for some people, those things are, they're almost like tumors, like they're a bugger to get rid of for some people. Can you speak to that? Getting rid of those more tenacious limiting beliefs.
Yeah, I think limiting beliefs are, I describe them as things that either you've bought into or you've sold yourself on. Somewhere down the line, you heard something or somebody told you something and you've believed it. And you've believed it so long that it's real. And that's why sometimes it's hard to get rid of. Or it's something that you've convinced yourself of. It doesn't, not all these limiting beliefs come from you. Sometimes they come from other people. Sometimes they come from your own life experience. Mm-hmm. You've tried something, it failed, and so you get wrapped up in that. I would just share this. Maybe there are people in this world that, maybe Richard Branson, maybe he has no limiting beliefs. Maybe there are a million people that don't have limiting beliefs. But in my experience, most people do. And I will share, I still do. Even just writing this book, terrified. As long as I've been wanting to do this, as long as I have been working on it, and I finally, literally pushed the button to publish it, scared to death. Because now everybody's going to be able to read this, and they're going to like it or they're not going to like it. Mm-hmm. And if they don't like it, that scares the devil out of me, that they may not like it. So, I still have this fear of being judged. I have this, I'm going out on speaking. I have a bunch of speaking engagements later this year. Mm-hmm. What I'm struggling with is the talk I want to give versus the talk that I usually give. Talk I usually give is the one that's content rich, it's information rich, but it's not vulnerable and maybe not even inspirational. Would it be beneficial to hear it? Yes. You would take things away, but would you be inspired? Maybe not. So, even to this day, all the things that I have done that have been successful, that have turned out successful, I have had plenty of failures to keep me on edge. Mm-hmm. So, how do you get past your limiting beliefs? Part of it is going through a process of trying to understand where they came from in the beginning and how true are they really. And so when I'm talking to people about this in my capacity as a coach, I'm asking, where did that come from? And not, why do you think like that? Mm-hmm. That's a very mental way to ask, but where did that come from? Where did you learn that? Was there ever a time when that wasn't true for you? And so when I'm trying to help people, if you say, what's a tool you could use if somebody's really hung up and they have so much fear they can't be who they know they should be or they are, I would say, where did they come from? How true are they? When did this surface for you? Was there ever a time when you didn't feel like that? And it's funny because people will, if they work at it, they will come up with some times in their life when that wasn't true for them. What that limiting belief is, and they can break through that.
Do you think it's hard for most people to even know what their limiting beliefs are?
Yeah, I think so. I think sometimes people just get wrapped up in their assumptions or their interpretations of events, or they're just the security of being inside of a fixed mindset. I mean, the thing about a fixed mindset is that it's very comfortable in there, And so I was actually talking to a friend of mine earlier today who has lost a bunch of weight,
mm-hmm.
And so he's realizing he's had to change his habits, and his whole mindset has changed because he realized that his food issues were all around continuing to make himself feel bad. So he felt bad, so he ate. And so if he started losing weight, it was uncomfortable, so he would eat. And when he ate, he felt bad. And he got really good at feeling bad about himself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's a really hard cycle to break out of. So he has finally gone back and done some work with a coach to understand where these feelings come from, and he's been able to detach his thinking from the actual food, and he's changed his habits. So I think when somebody's trying to decouple from these mindsets, I mean, I always think about this: a limiting belief is somewhat of an opinion that you form, and when you form this opinion, you're by default eliminating all other possibilities. So I would try to have people go through and say, this is their truth. This is their true. Let's say it that way. It's true for them, but it might not be the truth.
Right.
And so that's what I try to get people to do. So let's talk about what's the truth here, not just what you know to be true in your experience.
So you're saying that so initially, obviously, it's about identifying what those beliefs are. And then are you saying then it's a process of starting to get people to think differently about it and start to chip away at this unhealthy foundation that they've built around this belief?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. I mean, I have grandkids now. We're blessed to have 4 grandkids, and it's when they're little, they're completely unencumbered. They're unencumbered. They don't have any limiting beliefs. They don't have. They're curious about everything. They're free, and somewhere along the way, as parents or grandparents, we tell them things, and then they experience rejection, and they experience teasing, and they get their self gets challenged. So we acquire these things sometimes all the way back to first grade. If somebody made fun of you because you were skinny in the first grade, you might carry that with your whole life. You might, if somebody made a comment about you being short, plenty of short people have accomplished amazing things in life. But if somebody told you that, and that was a problem, or they made fun of you, you could literally carry that with you, that you couldn't do something because you were too short. So getting back to the source of where these things come from, I think is a key to helping people understand how to let go of the limiting belief.
So, Steve, would you be willing to share an example of your own, of one of your limiting beliefs, so where you kind of recognize the source and have had success in sort of stomping on it or moving past it?
Well, I will say, I will use the example of being skinny. Probably a better example, however, though, is the fact that I did not finish college. Okay, I essentially flunked out of college. Mm-hmm. I went to college in the early 70s. The school I went to was a party environment. I lived in a small town. I wasn't exposed to a lot, and when I went off to college, I did okay academically, but I got off track, and so I didn't have good enough grades to come back for the third year. I had 2 years of college, mm-hmm. and I'll tell you, that stayed with me for maybe a decade. That I was less than because I didn't have a college degree. And it was particularly hard during the situations where I was in front of a client, and clients would ask me, mm-hmm. "Oh, are you a CFP? No. Are you a CLU or CHFC or whatever designation? Where did you go to college?" And boy, bam, just hit me at my core. Just, I'm not good enough. Right there, because I didn't finish college, but I did overcome it finally, because what I did is I went out and I got some certifications, and I also eventually became more and more comfortable with telling people that I didn't go to college, mm-hmm. but I had specific education in the financial services arena that was more valuable than any sophomore English class I could have passed. So, and then, some people were just put off by it. And fine. I finally learned that was okay. Not everybody's going to be my client. So that's an example of where I finally got past that limiting belief. Once I got some education, once I got some certifications, it gave me confidence to step up and say, well, that's just a chapter of my life that's passed, and I've let that go, and now I've moved on.
That's cool. So the education ironic, it was, though, education that built your confidence back up. Is that what you're saying too, though?
Because I had placed a value, that was a high value, on having people think or know that I was competent.
And it's also fair to say, though, and tell me if this is not the case, but I would also assume that as you realized that you were helping people in pretty significant ways, it didn't make any difference, as you said, whether you'd taken that English class when you were 19 years old. I mean, is that also a fair comment?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, your confidence comes from your competence, but your competence can come from experience.
Yeah. I mean, I can't help but think, it's funny you mentioned Richard Branson. Well, I'm pretty darn sure he didn't go to university. And I always remember a line from Tony Robbins, who made a comment about, I'm quite sure he doesn't have a college degree, although I don't know that for a fact, but I don't think he does. But he made a comment about, well, his PhD's in results. And certainly that's often what people care about. So anyway, but thank you for sharing that as an example. I wanted to come back to, you'd made a comment about, I've had plenty of failure. And it's a thought that's occurred to me. I mean, how often do you see people who are stuck where what's happened is they've had a failure, but it's something that they've emotionally reacted to very negatively or very strongly. So they may not have failed a lot, but they've taken it so badly that it's basically stopped them. How common do you think that is in terms of people not, going on to fulfill their potential?
I've got to imagine it's quite common. I mean, I would classify that as, an inner block that's kind of built around assumptions. The idea is that because that happened before, that it's going to happen again. And the thing I've always told people is that you literally cannot have success without failure. Because, maybe technically you could get lucky. The first time you played the lottery, you could win. Or the first time you started a business, you have an idea that was so powerful that you became a multimillionaire. But most aspects of life, you're going to fail a lot. And I say that the failure is kind of the secret sauce of success. It's forming a relationship with failure that allows you to understand that it's part of the process to get to a place that you might call success. Mm-hmm. So it's really I guess a reframing of your mindset around failure.
When you first started attending top of the table meetings, what surprised you about the people you met? And I bring it up specifically here because I wonder if that's one of the things that whether you noticed it there, that the people there maybe just had a higher tolerance of failure or a healthier, whatever, a more open-minded attitude to it. Is that something you did experience or not?
I think if I had to just come up with one thing off the top of my head that I noticed about top of the table producers versus MDRT producers or average producers or however you want to describe it, is that they have the ability to focus and to say no to those things that don't further their goal. In other words, they don't take clients that don't meet their criteria. Mm-hmm. If they sell insurance, they don't typically get involved in investments. If they sell investments, they don't typically get involved in insurance. Now, obviously, there's plenty of people out there that sell insurance and investments, and they do financial planning, and then they do it all, and they built a practice around that. But generally speaking, the concept is being able to say no to the wrong prospects so that they can have more room for the right clients.
It's interesting you say that. One of the things I noticed on your website, I think it was, and I think I wrote it down, but it was a comment about people pleasing. I know I wrote it down. Yeah, break the addiction to approval from other people. Does that tie in there? I mean, it does to my mind when you say no to the things that don't further your goal, because I think of the number of people I've coached over the years, but dropped that, I mean, were impossible to coach because they were addicted to dropping everything anytime for anyone, and then never working on their business or on themselves, because in their mind, good customer service meant that didn't matter what level client that was contacting them, they immediately had to drop everything and help that person. So is that kind of what you're talking about in terms of people pleasing on your website?
Yeah. I think, for me, in my experience, just from having lived through it to seeing people that I coach or seeing other advisors that I know, they're always so busy. They're so busy. They answer the phone. They're reactive, constantly reactive. If the copier breaks, they go try to fix it. If a client calls and wants to come in today, they do it. They just call home and say, "I can't be home for dinner. A client's coming in," and it's just chaos. And a lot of that is just from around this idea that you need to be on call. You need to, you could lose the business if you don't see people when they want to be seen. And that might be partially true, but it's built around this idea of people pleasing, not being able to say no to things that don't further your own life goals or further your own, values. And this is where I get back to the whole thing about who are you? What are your boundaries? I don't think any client in my experience, in my career, ever gave me a hard time and I said, I cannot meet you on Friday night because that's the night that my wife and I go out to dinner. Mm-hmm. And if they did say no, I wouldn't want them as a client. So there's a gap there between where this person is that's so busy, that's stop, drop, and roll when the phone rings, to being able to say, we're open from 9 to 6 every day except for Friday. We're open until 4 on Fridays. We typically see clients on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so we don't have an opening for you this Tuesday or Thursday. We'll look at the following week for Tuesday and Thursday. And they have a very orderly way of doing their business. I think most clients would probably respect that level of organization, as opposed to, I can sell you anything, anytime. I'm here to sell,
No, wait. So are you saying that also one of the things you learned from at Top of the Table was that people there almost had more self-worth about their time, or perhaps didn't have as much of a scarcity mindset about business, or fear-based thinking? Is that also true?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, I think by the time, in order to get to the place where you can produce at that level, you have to have eliminated some things from your life, which means you've had to say no to something. You've either had to let go of control. Actually, I talk about this in my book, and forgive me for mentioning that, but there's a chapter on 6 mindsets of success, and one of them is people pleasing, and one of them is letting go of control, essentially empowering other people, delegating, automating, outsourcing. One is understanding and being able to articulate your true value proposition. And I know that's kind of a cliche term, what's your value proposition, but it's really understanding what your value is. That your time is valuable, that your skills are valuable, that it's saying no to clients, all those things. You have to buy the book to read all 6 of them. But
no. No, it's
anyways, that type of thing, and these are things that, in all seriousness, that you will find common amongst top of the table producers, is that they learn to say no. They learn to stay focused on what furthers their highest level goals, and whether those goals are to be home for dinner every night, or whether those goals are to only work with clients that have $1 million or more to invest, or whether they only work with business owners and buy-sell agreements. Whatever it is, they've narrowed their focus, and they have the discipline to shed everything else and everything else.
And I would think the courage as well to stick by it, because I would imagine that it doesn't immediately spring forth instant results either. Is that a fair comment?
Probably. That's probably true. I mean, I know when I switched from commissions to fees, it was about a 4-year process of some financial suffering, because I was walking away from an upfront commission today and essentially deferring income over a 4-year period of time until I got back to a place where that was a kind of a break even. So
What kind of narrowing down or focusing did you need to do to make it to top of the table?
Well, that was one of them. Was just being able to say, look, I'm going to use a car analogy. I'm a BMW dealer. I don't sell Volkswagens. Okay. I don't sell Volkswagens, for instance. So I'm only taking that client. The other one was being able to keep a regular set of business hours so that I have some normalcy in my life, and then hiring people to delegate things to, so that I didn't have to be the one that was responsible for doing everything. Mm-hmm. And that had to do with giving up some control.
One question I have around that is around the money part. That I think the risk many people fear about the delegation is they feel like they're in this catch-22 where they can't really afford to hire somebody else, and so they end up doing the work because they don't really have the money. So I guess it's acknowledging that there's a risk involved. How do you coach people through that?
I think at this point you just have to decide if you're a salesperson or a business person. I mean, a business person would they understand that there's risk involved, and they understand that you can't do everything yourself. There's a wonderful book out that you're probably aware of, the E-Myth. Mm-hmm. It's Michael Gerber, and it's a story about a woman who makes pies, and she tries to run the whole business herself and make the pies, and it's a nice story about that. But I think that what I've seen people do is share a person to delegate to. If you're in a New York Life office someplace and there's 3 New York Life agents that all want assistance, hire one together. Mm-hmm. Pay a third of it, or split it with 4 people until you start to see results. Because it's not an expense; it's an investment. Mm-hmm. It allows you to spend more time on your highest level goals, which really. It's about understanding what it is you really do get paid for. Right. So like I said, if you're a salesman or a woman, then your job is to sell product. Mm-hmm. And the high level goal there is what are the things that you have to do to free you up to sell more. If you're a business owner, your highest level goal is to make profit and to create a business that allows you to facilitate that high level goal. So,
is there anything else that you learned from your top of the table, peer networking? And the reason I ask is because a friend of mine, the first time he went to a top of the table meeting, I remember he said something very similar to you. It was half of it was different, but half of it was the same. So what was different for him was he said something like, I expected everybody there to be really, really intelligent, or brilliant, intellectually. And he said he was really surprised how that wasn't his experience at all. There was nothing remarkable about people's brain power, but he said what was shocking to him or amazing was just how he may have used the word focus, but he said that they all worked one thing really well. He said they all had great processes and systems in place, and they stuck to it. So they kept it simple in that regard, and then they worked it really, really, really well and as efficiently as they as possibly could. That's how I recall his recollections. Again, is there anything else? Because again, one of the whole points to this podcast, I suppose, is learning from the best. Are there other things? What about mindsets? We've kind of gone in and out on that one in terms of handling failure, spending more time with more positive, empowering people. I suppose the mindset part in terms of really questioning limiting beliefs to the point where you recognize that they're extremely flawed and not serving us. And I'm sure there's a few other things that you've mentioned as well. I also know that's a part of your book is, mindset. So talk about the mindsets needed to bridge that success gap.
One of the examples that just kind of popped in my head was, and it's something that I learned from top of the table peers, was this idea that you kind of are what you eat. So if you have a clientele that's just, everybody expects a different kind of a report. Everybody, some clients like their spreadsheets on Excel. Some clients want it on Word document. If all your clients have $50,000 accounts and you've got 2,000 of them, then that's who you are. That's what your business is. If you want 100 $5 million clients, you can build a system around that, but you've got to say no to all these other people. So it was that level of simplicity, focusing, and then building the system around what it was you want. So I'll give you an example of how I use this in my business. I used to do financial planning on a fee basis, and I would do a financial plan for some amount of money, from years too little, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
But it was almost like a loss leader. We would spend 25 hours putting together a financial plan for you in the hopes that you would buy insurance from us, or that you would bring your money over to invest, et cetera, et cetera. And then what started happening was people decided, hey, I can just pay this fee for a financial plan, and then I can just use my own insurance agent, or I can just invest it myself with Schwab or someplace. So what we started doing was we simply made a small shift in our mindset about this. We said, look, what do we really want at this point in our business? What do we want? And what we wanted, when I say we, I said my staff and I, we just want to manage people's money and do financial planning only for our clients. So in order to be a client, you have to bring us your money. And that's just a little tweak. We're still doing financial planning. We're still managing money. We're still selling the insurance if that's what they need and they want to buy it. But what we did is we simply said, you have to bring us your money, because we only do financial planning for our clients. And they said, well, what do we have to do to be a client? Bring us your money. So it was amazing. People started saying, well, here's the money. And once we got the money, we did the financial plan and everything that came from that. And guess what else happened? People said, no, we don't want to bring you our money. And we said, well, thank you for inquiring. And so we had to be willing to walk away from that business. So what ended up happening is my business I don't like to use numbers, but it was a significant, like maybe 100, 200% increase over what we had previously done, because we only got what we wanted.
Right.
When we got what we wanted, the why behind that was that we could build a system around that type of client, and everything was just consistent. Everybody got the same plan. Everybody got the same reports. We knew the language of that marketplace. We knew the language of that size of customer. So it was a process of changing our mindset, knowing some people are going to walk away from us, but knowing that whatever we got was just exactly what we wanted. So we're just walking along the road, picking up black rocks. We're not picking up speckled rocks. We're not picking up white rocks. We're just picking up black rocks. We're going to walk past a lot of rocks on this journey, but we're only picking up the black ones. And guess what we ended up with? A bag of black rocks, which is exactly what we wanted.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely, it's funny. I'm sure to you now it's so obvious, but I think many of us are just chasing too many rabbits, quite frankly, and not, for whatever, sometimes with good intentions, sometimes out of a desire to help lots of people, but ultimately, we get what we get, and if we don't change our actions and thinking, then we're going to get the same results. So I think this is absolutely priceless. I just wrote down the words healthy boundaries, and then your comment about we only get what we want, well, we only got what we wanted, but that's what we all want.
But you have to say no to the other things.
Yes. And also, as you said, you've got to have that clarity about what is it you really, really want, and does it align with your values? Because I think these are deep questions that we can't, I think we're all more unduly influenced by the culture we live in than we like to admit we are. And so we get sucked into thinking that we want bigger, faster, better all the time, when that, as you said, may not get us home for dinner on a Friday night, or time with our children and so on. So it's a process, as you said. It's a discovery journey that I know you talk about in your book. And this is a perfect transition, actually. So I've got 3 final questions for you. Although just before I ask you a bit more about the book, who would you say you've become since you started kind of on this self-discovery journey, whether that started when you were 30 or whether it happened during the sort of the business divorce, but who would you say you've become?
I think who I've become now is someone who is comfortable with knowing that I'm a little different. And what I mean by that is I have owned my contrarian thinking. I've come to own my way of seeing the world as gray versus black and white. I used to think that just because I was, why am I always the contrarian here in the room? Why everybody's going one way, yet I'm still thinking that maybe OJ might have been innocent. Is it possible? And guess what? Because I have this mindset, I end up getting on a lot of juries when I get jury duty, because I have this ability to think, like there's possibilities. It could be something different. And what I learned was that was a great skill set as a financial planner and as a coach, by the way, to understand that, hey, I'm a little bit different, and that's a gift, not a burden.
And I see that also as self-acceptance too, which is something most of us could get better at. So speaking of which, my second question is, what's a good first step for people listening to get more to be more effective on this journey?
I would say maybe to do like a values assessment. I would say, go back to that who, what, why. Who are you? And I'm not talking about your role, a dad, I'm a podcaster, an insurance agent, or advisor. But who are you? You are a creative person. You're a funny person. You're a caring person. What matters to you? What matters to you that you help other people. What matters to you is that you be a good leader in your home or in your community. Taking an assessment of all the things that really are important to you. That is who you are. And when you make a list of all the things that are important to you, that in essence is a list of who you are as a person. And from there, you can start to make some choices about creating boundaries around that. Because anything that doesn't really fit into that is not good for you. It's not going to further your mission in life. Your what? If once you get really clear about your values, you will fight for those. Those are the things that are most important to you. Those should be the things that you fight the hardest for. But you should also fight hard to make sure that other things don't take you off that path. So that's the first step, is getting very, very clear about what your values are, because that's really who you are at your core. And that helps you set boundaries, and also helps you set goals, which is where the what comes from. Well, now what do you want to do with that? And once you get clear about that, then you can start stepping into the why. And why is that important to you? And again, that just wraps right back around to your values. Those are all the things that you're going to fight for. Those are all the things that you're willing to, climb the mountain for, die on the mountain, as some people say. So that's how I would start.
That's brilliant. And it's funny because from a practical standpoint, then my next thought is, when do I schedule the time to do that? Because obviously it needs some quiet time. But it is the next thought. I think I'm hoping for people listening too is when are you going to at least start that process, even if it's in 20 or 30-minute increments. But so thank you, Steve. That's absolutely priceless, really, I think. And then lastly, how can listeners keep in touch with you?
Well, they can email me if they want at Coach Plewes, COACHPLEWES @gmail.com. They can also find me at www.steveplewes.com, which is my website, and there's contact information there. Mm-hmm. I'm also on Facebook. I have Steve Plewes Coaching, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Okay.
There's lots of different ways to get a hold of me.
And then what about the book? Is that through your steveplewes.com?
It will be shortly. I'm setting up a store on the website, but you can simply go to Amazon.com, regardless of where you are in the world. You should be able to find it. It's called The High Altitude View.
Okay, brilliant. So I'll make sure I put a link on that on the show notes, The High Altitude View.
You can find it right on Amazon. It's available for purchase, and also there's a Kindle version. I'm in the process of linking those two things so they'll show up on the same page, but you can just search Kindle, Kindle books and the same title, and you'll find them in both places.
Oh, that's brilliant. So Steve, what I'm going to do is obviously thank you so much for your time and wisdom, and it's been such a pleasure to soak up some of these brilliant ideas and really practical ones as well that people can use right away. So thank you so much for that. I'm just also going to wrap up with listeners to say, I always like to say, Certainly, yes. Steve has accomplished an enormous number of remarkable things. He's still a person, so please don't put anyone on a pedestal when you're listening to this. You know, start with where you are, right, and keep moving one step forward. No one's perfect in every area. No such person exists, so keep that in mind. Otherwise, thank you for listening. You obviously take at least one next step based on what you heard today, preferably more. Show notes are on my website, matt-anderson.com, matt-anderson.com, as well as obviously links to this on iTunes as well as on YouTube. Otherwise, with that, I will sign off with my favorite question, which is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'm Matt Anderson, and this was The Road Not Taken.